Chris Kenny on media.
Thanks for joining me. Lots coming up on ABC Bias, even in its coverage of cartoons. How could they not like Johannes Leek? I'll catch up with him later as usual too. And an internal climate crisis group at aa2ad3c3f is more persistent even than the drought. Also, a current affair dives back into the big political interview.
Where have you been?
Well, I think that's a bit unfair, Tracy.
All that and more coming up. Let's get stuck into the media. 2 years ago, I looked at the lack of political diversity on the ABC TV's program The Drum. It's a weekly or nightly panel show, and I showed how it was relentlessly skewed to the Green left, antagonistic to Conservatives, and it went out of its way to shun anyone from the Institute of Public Affairs. These findings were vindicated by last year's election coverage review conducted for the ABC by former BBC advisor Kerry Blackburn, who revealed a heavy left-of-centre bias on The Drum. This week, we decided to look at the national broadcaster's weekly political panel show, Insiders. Now, there is some subjectivity involved in all of this, as we decided the best way to categorise panellists was not by party or left versus right, but by those with a conservative bent, say Greg Sheridan from The Australian, those who we would portray as impartial or neutral, such as the ABC's Stan Grant or The Australian's Rosie Lewis, and then the anti-conservatives, ranging from green left champions, such as The Guardian Australia's Catherine Murphy, to the small L liberals who rail against conservatives, such as The Australian's Nikki Sava. We went back over every episode for the past 12 months, and of the 142 appearances, just 22, or only 15%, represented the Conservative side of the debate. We figured that only 10 spots, or just 7%, were taken by neutral or impartial commentators, and a whopping 110, that's 77%, or more than three-quarters, were anti-conservatives, people whose commentary is typically antagonistic to conservative policies, values and politicians. Now, we also looked at where the panellists came from, and surprise, surprise, the ABC topped the list with more than a quarter of all the panellist spots. The fringe left website, the Australian version of The Guardian, took 13% of the slots, and their green left comrades at the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age took 11%. Commentators from News Corp made up just under 25%, or a quarter of the panellists. That might sound fairer than it actually was, because of the 35 appearances by News Corp commentators, 22, or more than 60% of them, were in the anti-conservative camp. We're talking those like the Australian columnist and 10 political editor Peter Van Onselen, news.com.au's Samantha Maiden, and the Sunday Telegraph's Annika Smethurst, who's now the political editor at The Age. But these stats are not a huge surprise, especially when we see weekly examples like these.
I think what we're going to get from this inquiry is we're going to understand how colonisation is still leading to the contemporary issues that we face today.
But it does mean that the Australian government is way out of step, that the idea of a gas-led recovery is really looking way out of step with the rest of the world.
I don't for the life of me understand how any Conservative commentator could ever go for someone as vile as Donald Trump. It says more about how puddle deep they are.
State Labor premiers have learned over the last several months, because of the way the Commonwealth has rounded on Daniel Andrews, that the Commonwealth won't be there backing you in.
Privilege is about when you don't understand how much power you have.
Wow, would that be, for example, the privilege of being a $1.1 billion taxpayer-funded behemoth and treating with contempt your statutory obligations for political impartiality and hosting a diversity of ideas? Let's bring out my panel now, and I'm joined by Gemma Tognini, columnist, broadcaster and Sky News contributor. Good to see you on the set, Gemma.
Great to be in the land of the free, Chris.
Great stuff. And also Nick Cater, former editor of the Weekend Australian, of course, with the Menzies Research Centre now. Good to see you, Nick.
Thank you, Chris. I won't ask what with those categories you're going to put me in.
Yeah, well, exactly. I'll be happy to put you in the Conservative camp, Nick, but surely you've got to have a diversity. It's the national broadcaster.
You have, and I think it was quite clever the way you did that, because, you know, you could go Labor, Liberal, and probably it would get roughly there, depending where you put people. But that's essentially it. It's the cultural debate of our time, isn't it? Conservatives versus progressives, and that's the way they should think about balancing their panels, if they thought about it at all.
Yeah, they often do that, Gemma. They would say this person works for News Corp or used to work for the Liberal Party, but they tend to go for those smaller Liberal types who, hate the Morrisons, who have railed against John Howard and Tony Abbott.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the interesting thing about that show, Insiders, I do fondly recall a day when you sort of did get the impression that you were speaking to people who genuinely had inside knowledge and inside, plugged into the system, rather than I don't think anyone on the program called the election in 2019. I think everyone was wrong. So, let's start with that as a starting point. But I'm somewhat hopeful that there is a glimmer of impartiality left in the political coverage, but I don't see it.
I think Jared Henderson might have been on there and called the election, and Jared watches this show, so I hope we've got you right there, Jared. Now, I want to come back to some ABC matters in a moment, but it's been a big and difficult week for Scott Morrison as this gender war really plays out in federal politics. And the ABC, especially at the 7:30 report, is really focused on their inability to get an interview with Scott Morrison. They pulled out the corny old, lame old trick of filming the empty chair in the studio and saying they couldn't get an interview with Scott Morrison. But instead, Scott Morrison turned up at an extended interview on the Nine Network with Tracy Grimshaw, the host of A Current Affair. Have a look at some of that from last night.
This has taken me deeper into this issue than I've appreciated before.
Where have you been?
Well, I think that's a bit unfair, Tracy, because I think there are many people across this country who you live with it every day. You've lived with it, I'm sure, your whole life. You have. And I'm sure almost every woman has.
Do.
And this is...
But you're not on an island. Or maybe you're in a bubble in Canada. I don't know. But you're not on an island. You must know you've got a wife you love, you've got daughters you go to school. You've referenced them several times. How did you not know the depth of it?
Well, this is the difficult part of this. You understand it in a way that only you could.
Scott Morrison with Tracy Grimshaw there. And Gemma, this shows us you get a different kind of interview when you get out of the Canberra bubble. I thought it was quite telling. Now, Scott Morrison is right. We can't know what it's like to be a woman. But I'm surprised that a bloke of his age hasn't been fully aware of that and trying to put himself in a woman's shoes for decades.
Oh, not a great week for him, definitely. But I do want to point something out, and I can because I'm the only chick on the panel.
Indeed.
This idea that all women think the same. That there is a cohort of women in the current media and political space who say things like, all women are sick of this and all women are exhausted by this. I can tell you that not all women are.
But all women know what it's like to deal with these issues.
We know what it's like to deal with these issues. I've worked all my life in media and corporate consulting, and I know what this kind of behaviour is like, but I don't feel still like a victim. I don't feel like this group of women who are carrying this story, as is their job, but they don't speak for me and they don't speak for a lot of women I know. Has the Prime Minister covered himself in glory this week? No, he could have done better. It's a difficult week for him. But what I loathe in corporate life and in the media is when somebody stumbles and then makes an apology and says, I fell short. What would we prefer? They double down, we criticise them for apologising. I am, as a woman watching this, somewhat frustrated that there is one voice, a singular voice.
Yeah, I don't think the media generally has covered itself in glory here, Nick. I think we've got trial by media going on. It's raising some important issues, but they're always there. And I've written about this in the Weekend Australian tomorrow. But nonetheless, whether it's fair or not, a Prime Minister has to somehow deal with this in the public debate.
He does, and he's got to deal with it on the terms in which he's presented it, even if it is unfair. And I think that's right. I think what you're seeing now is people saying, look, he's got to, we've suddenly realised that women are in this position. No. The attitude and approach to women has been changing since at least World War II. In various stages, and you and I, we go back a long time in the news business. The sort of way women were treated when I first went into newspapers is very much different from then. There's been a lot of progress. We've got a lot of progress to make, but it's not once off. But your point about the media, and if I can go back to that empty chair stunt, the media come out of this just looking so arrogant like they expect this whole thing to be played out like some soap opera in real time on their show, and they're so important. Why isn't the Prime Minister there? You know, we should have an empty chair here for the MD of the ABC.
Yep.
Why isn't he
David
here
Anderson,
questions about this?
Love you on the show any week. You name your week, we'll do it. We'll come and talk to you anywhere. You were going to add something, Gemma?
Well, I just feel like the other part of the puzzle is that, yes, this boil, and I talk about it in my column in tomorrow's Australian, Chris, this boil has been lanced on Scott Morrison's watch. How would it have been covered if it was on a former, a potential Prime Minister, Bill Shorten, or Albanese's watch? Some sections of the media are acting as if this problem was born post the 2019 election.
Exactly.
It is partisan tomfoolery. It's dishonest. And if we really want this environment to change, then that would be part of the conversation. This is generations in the making.
Yep.
This bloke just happens to be the one lumped with fixing it.
If you're serious about it, take the partisan politics out of it. Spot on. Let me move on, though. Later in the program, I'll catch up with Johannes Leek, who, in my view, is clearly already the best political cartoonist in the country. I know many of you think the same. But we often feature some other great cartoons from terrific News Corp cartoonists such as Mark Knight and Warren Brown, as well as their competitors at Nine Media and the like. So let's go back to Insiders, where they have a weekly talking pictures segment. Do you reckon they'd be politically jaundiced even in that segment? Of course they are. Hosted by The Guardian Australia's photographer Mike Bowers, this segment entrenches the heavy green left bias of Insiders. Over the past year, it's shown 255 cartoons. 80 of them, or almost a third, were from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, and another 23% in total from their stablemates at the Australian Financial Review and the Canberra Times. That's more than half all up from the Nine Media or the old Fairfax. And then there were 8% from the niche hard left Saturday paper and a bunch of others from freelancers. So what about Metropolitan News Corp publications? Well, just 31, 12% were featured. The best cartoons, the ones seen and enjoyed by most readers, the ones that, unlike most of the lefty cartoons, actually make you laugh, account for about 1 in 8 of the cartoons featured on Insiders. Oh, and of all those cartoons, just 2 were from Johannes Leek. How ridiculous. They shove lovely cartoons down everyone's throats week after week. Some, like David Rose, are works of art. Others are neither well-drawn nor funny, in my view, but most push the desired political line.
Black Lives Matter movement may have started in the US, but the local version has gained a lot of support. Kathy Wilcox, Lord Muck, slave trader, coloniser, he stands in his place to remind us of ours. Boy, Chris Downs is not mucking around here. Oh, look, China photoshopped a fake image on social media to try and tarnish Australia's human rights record, says a Manus Island detention centre detainee.
Another very valid point and an illustration of what Australia does.
And just listen to what the Guardian Australia's political correspondent is allowed to get away with here. Bear in mind it's late June 2020 when the Victorian government belatedly responded to its horror second coronavirus wave thanks to its hotel quarantine debacle.
Amy, in case you're wondering what state COVID's in, attention passengers, this is your Captain Dan Andrews speaking. Could I just get everyone locked back in their cabins? Thanks.
And a lovely reminder of where so many of Australia's COVID cases did originate from.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, cruisers.
New South Wales.
There were nearly 800 deaths from that second wave, over 18,000 cases. 99% originated from Melbourne hotel quarantine, but somehow the New South Wales coalition government is to blame. Never miss a chance for partisan disinformation, even if it's just in interpreting your cartoons. Gemma, they can't help themselves.
I mean, the silliness of that, it was just silliness because we know it was widely reported that the genomic sequencing proved that that's the origin of those second wave cases in Victoria came from hotel quarantine. It's not even open for interpretation. We're all talking about believing the science. The science was well reported. So I just think that does, unfortunately, I think it does, the reporter in that show a massive disservice. It's just silliness and it wasn't factual or fair.
The science is in. When we get back to the cartoons, Nick, you and I are good mates of Johannes Leek's, but I mean, it's so clear that his stuff is such quality and so funny and so up to date with the politics of the day. And you throw in Warren Brown and Mark Knight, and the ABC not so interested in them.
No, well, I think it's yet more proof that the left has lost its sense of humour, right? So they don't expect cartoons to be funny. We actually do, and that's why we like Johannes and you know, many of the News Limited cartoonists. It is just blatant, isn't it? And yet I bet, you know, if Mike was here, Mike Bowes was here with us now, he wouldn't even recognise. He doesn't even recognise his own bad.
Look, it's worth a cartoon. Hopefully Johannes can knock one up on this issue. We'll see how we go. Now, remember those ABC presenters trying to set up an internal climate crisis group, and how the national broadcaster's chair, aa2ad3c3f declared it wouldn't be happening?
ABC producer has gauged interest in starting a brains trust of ABC staffers to develop ways to report and inform Australians about climate crisis using
It's one of those ideas that it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen?
No.
Why not?
Because the ABC leadership team and the managing director have thought otherwise.
Well, we've told you before that they ignored that directive or ultimatum and went ahead regardless. And now the Institute of Public Affairs has used freedom of information applications to obtain this group's chats on Microsoft Teams. And it makes for some amusing reading. Have a look at this from December 2019, 2 weeks after the Buttrose interview. Climate Crisis Solutions Group meeting in Melbourne, scheduled for this evening, is deferred to January the 15th unless there's an overwhelming preference for another date. Fair enough, they're all getting together. And this, does anyone know the best person within the ABC to speak to about our travel policy regarding paying the carbon offsets for flights? Is there specific policy that anyone is aware of? Just wanting to build an argument for company-wide offsets for ABC employees' flight bookings. I just went and calculated my own offsets for all my ABC-related flights in the last 18 months and 20 times return flights. 3,770 kilograms of CO2 came to $49. I'd love to be able to pass this info on to the right people if anyone has suggestions. Wow, how about that? Saving the planet, 40 flights and $49 at a time. How about just flying less? Pick up the phone or zoom in. Heaven help anyone looking like a climate hypocrite. There was this as well. I think the refugee angle is a new way of looking at the climate change consequences that could have impact. The comparisons with how Australia mobilised for World War II and the US acted to prevent a nuclear disaster during the Cold War are powerful. Another message refers disparagingly to some arsehole climate denier. In 2019, we wrote to these ABC presenters, politely asking if they still intended forming this group after Buttrose's admonishment. None of them replied, but they certainly discussed it among themselves. I just received this email. I don't intend to comment, says one. Yep, me too. I deleted, says another. And from yet another, yeah, right. Why would anyone talk to them? How rude. Come on, people. Good manners are free. How about a climate of transparency? Nick, they're in their own little world there, aren't they? Why don't they just stump up for the carbon offsets themselves?
If I was going to make the cheap shot on this, I'd say the idea of an ABC brains trust on anything is sort of slightly counterintuitive. But look, I mean, they're activists and they can't draw the line between, you know, a quite mad position, which is the, you know, climate emergency position, and a sensible one over, you know, how we sensibly deal with offsets. So, what can they pay for their offsets themselves?
Well, exactly. This is my point. $49. Why don't they just fly less?
Having lived the last 12 months in Western Australia, literally locked in my own state, I don't see a reason why they can't just say we don't have to fly. We can zoom in, we can dial in via any number of digital platforms. So that's my first point. My second observation is, you know, when I worked full-time in a newsroom, Chris, and I don't know who these people are, whether they were journalists or not, but I didn't have the time for this.
Exactly.
Surely in a commercial environment, when I was splitting my job between chief of staff, senior reporter, associate producer and sometimes presenter, I did not have time to do anything but do my job, which involved being fair and accurate, regardless of my personal beliefs.
Spot on. Now, very quickly, before we go, I've got to show some of this. Joe Biden, overnight our time, gave his first press conference since being inaugurated. It took him more than 60 days, and have a look at some of what he had to say.
With regard to the filibuster, I believe we should go back to a position of the filibuster that existed just when I came to the United States Senate 120 years ago. The best way to get something done, if you hold near and dear to you that you like to be able to, anyway.
Jeepers, Gemma, he's talking about running again in 2024. I don't think he remembers he ran last year.
It's terrifying. I have nothing else to say other than that is terrifying. And everyone who voted for him to spite the Trump administration, you should watch that on repeat.
It's a worry, isn't it, Nick?
It's extraordinary. It's the first time I've seen it, right? Because it's completely ignored by the mainstream media. And yet if it was a Ronald Reagan, they'd be all over it.
Great to talk to both of you. Thanks for coming in.
Great to be here as always.
Time for Newsleak with Johannes now. He joins us as always. Johannes, we mentioned you earlier in the program, actually. A whole year of insiders talking pictures and only 2 cartoons from you. Are you offended?
Oh, look, mate, as a cartoonist, I think it'd be a bit rich for me to profess to be offended by something like that. It'd be pretty poor form. So I'll see. Maybe I'll get lucky again one more time this year. We'll see what happens.
Mate, work away, develop your skills. Try and draw better and be funnier, and maybe they'll appreciate it, honestly. Talk about your cartoon today. I've got to start with that, Johannes. I just love it. This is where China has been slagging off at Australia, criticising us over refugee policy and war crimes and the like. And you've picked up beautifully how this is just the same criticism that the left in Australian politics makes against Australia all the time. Bloke walking down the streets, sort of an emo type, saying Beijing has attacked our record on refugees, Aborigines and Afghanistan. And the woman with a My ABC T-shirt says, how ridiculous, not so much as a mention of climate change.
Well, and look, that cartoon may well have the clue in it as to why I'm not featured on Insiders more often.
Spot on. Now, let's have a look at your colleague from News Corp, the Herald Sun's Mark Knight. This is a lovely drawing reflecting the fact that Victoria is going back to hotel quarantine. And they've got the grand reopening. It looks like Faulty Towers with the acting Premier there saying, I'm pleased to announce the reopening of Victoria's rolled gold hotel quarantine system. And of course, what are people doing? They're all rushing off to buy toilet paper again.
I love it too. I love the way he's got Molino in Manuel's little white suit, and yeah, it's just a reflex action in Victoria. If the government says it's going to try quarantine, have it, roll the dice on quarantine again, it's just a reflex action. People are out frenzying on toilet paper and supplies. They know what's ahead.
There's just a beauty there that I've only just noticed. If you can get the cartoon up again, the sign, how in Faulty Towers they always get the sign, the letters the wrong way around. Right in the middle there it says farty bowels. Brilliant work from Mark Knight. But before I go on to the next cartoon, I just want to refresh everyone's memory of a little exchange between Sky News' own Andrew Clennell and the Prime Minister in a difficult press conference for him earlier in the week.
Doesn't it look like you've lost control of your ministerial staff here?
Well, I'll let you editorialise as you like, Andrew. But if anyone in this room wants to offer up the standards in their own workplaces by comparison, I'd invite you to do so.
Well, they're better than these, I would suggest.
Well, let me take you up on that.
Well, the Prime Minister turned out to be wrong there and apologised. He did lose his cool. And, Johannes, you've picked out this cartoon from Kathy Wilcox at the Sydney Morning Herald, and she's gone through this saying remedial empathy counselling for the Prime Minister. She's got a media advisor saying, right, let's try that again. You're in the press conference and everyone's over the spin. And he says, I'm sorry, women have been putting up with crap. I get it. Good. Now a reporter asks if you bear responsibility, and then he just explodes. Right, it's the lefty take on this, but it's not a bad little cartoon, is it?
Look, I think it's great. He makes a good pufferfish, doesn't he? It's just a perfect image. So, and it sort of says it all. Yes, he got very prickly, and that's exactly what Kathy's drawn.
Now, I want to run through a series of cartoons here that have a similar theme. I'm going to start off with yours from earlier in the week, and you've got ScoMo sitting at his desk there. All the headlines are about alleged rape in Parliament House, solo sex acts, prayer room sex and the like, and a media advisor again, supposedly with the worst floods in 100 years, and now this. And ScoMo says, when it rains, it pours. And Mark Knight has gone on a similar theme because he's got the floods enveloping Parliament House and the little house swept away by the torrent of sexual misconduct allegations. And yet again, Brett Lethbridge in the Courier Mail has got ScoMo under an umbrella of the rule of law, and he's drowning in public sentiment as accusations rain down on him. It's a great analogy that you and others have picked up on, because that's exactly what's happening, isn't it? The Prime Minister and Governor are being swamped by these. Every day there's a new angle on it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just as that, particular storm front just would not let up. I think a lot of cartoonists drew parallels there, and clearly you've shown that we did. But that is something that we often try to do, and during the week we've had, I mean, it was the obvious connection to draw, but it is relentless, just as the weather was, and it's showing no sign of letting up either. Well, I tell you what, Johannes, it's great to have you on every week. And because that earlier cartoon we showed you had Prime Minister Scott Morrison under pressure, maybe you'll crack it for another mention on Insiders this week. Yeah, I eagerly await the phone call. Great stuff. Johannes Leek there. As I say, I think he's the best, or if not, certainly one of the best political cartoonists in the country. Thanks for joining me. Hope you have a great weekend. See you next week.